Ganzo sure makes some really awesome knives, but they suck when it comes to naming them. This is the Ganzo G729, sometimes under the Firebird branding, sometimes just under the Ganzo branding, but that's it. You just get a model number and you don't get anything else. And I'm actually kind of tired of that. So if you go back and look at my older Ganzo reviews, I've, in quotation marks, put what I'm calling them, my own models for it. So like their copy of the Metal-Arc, I'm calling that the Warbler. Okay, this is obviously a copy of a Spyderco Paramilitary 2, and so I'm calling this the Cadre. Okay, this is the G729 Cadre, as far as I'm concerned, because we need something more recognizable to identify the knife as. But if you need to know how good the knife is, my answer is, for the price, this thing is damn hard to beat. I absolutely adore this knife. And we're not just going to be looking at the current generation version, as I often do. I try to procure the originals as well. I also have a Generation 1 version to show you, and there's a little bit more different between these than I initially would have expected. It's the same overall knife, but it's more than just the thumb hole being different. Before we get too far into this, here's the packaging I got mine in. It can come in a black box or this blue box. It just depends. And yeah, you can see Firebird's branding is on there as well. Firebird being how Ganzo typically sells their knives to the West, but sometimes they will still just use their own brand. G729GY, Hong Kong Firebird International. All of our information there. We slide this box open, and then we open it up. And it comes with a nice microfiber cloth. It came with this, and then a little silica packet inside to keep the knife from corroding while in storage. So honestly, that's all pretty nice. I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the price on this really quickly. Between $20 and $25, depending on what color you want. That's some nice packaging, as far as I'm concerned. I like that. Getting a microfiber cloth is kind of cute. But yeah, $20 to $25, just depending on how price fluctuates on Amazon or AliExpress and what color you want. They offer this in this beautiful bluish gray, this nice military OD green, a bright rescue orange, and a standard black. They may have made a carbon fiber handled version at some point too, but as far as the primary G10 versions go, those are the colors you have available to you. So right away, we have a lot of variety for such an affordable knife, which I love to see. But yeah, looking at these knives, it's pretty easy to tell that, like most of Ganzo's knives, not all, because they have started doing some original designs, but like most of Ganzo's knives, these are copies of the Spyderco Paramilitaries. Ganzo loves to copy other companies' designs, but as you can see, they've added a Benchmade axis lock to it. So they've kind of taken the two big bug companies, the spider and the butterfly, and they've combined elements of the two. We get the overall design and shape of a Spyderco Paramilitary, but we get Benchmade's iconic locking mechanism. So it creates something that's almost a unique creature of its own, despite being composed of borrowed parts, which is really fascinating to me. For those of you out there who don't like copies, you're going to probably comment something negative on this video about how we shouldn't buy Chinese knives and these are crap and go buy something else instead, like you typically always do. I get those on every single one of my review videos where I'm reviewing a copy or a clone of something. And that's fine. I welcome all opinions. But if you're looking for an amazing knife for 25 bucks or less, this thing is a 10 out of 10. It really is. Let's look at the blade. We have a 3.5-inch blade made out of 440C. And Ganzo's 440C has been very consistent and very consistently impressive with me. I've used it a hell of a lot. Now, when Ganzo first started out, I was not impressed with their 440C. And I'll talk about that whenever I do my review of their Rift copy. Okay, one of the original models from Ganzo. Their 440C was okay, but it honestly performed at or even below HCR 13 MOV, which for me was not very satisfactory when they're advertising it as a better steel. Okay, because 440C, when done right, is a significantly better steel than HCR. It just gets a bad reputation because of all the really poorly treated 440Cs that you can find on really cheap knives. Ganzo's is not world-class by any means. I've certainly used better. Benchmade's 440C is better, but it's a hell of a lot better than the average Chinese knife in the same steel, and it definitely is a noticeable performance upgrade over HCR 13 for me. I'm not sure if I'll ever upload it. Maybe I'll make some YouTube shorts with it, but I actually have a few videos of me using this exact knife, breaking down tons and tons and tons of cardboard, just slicing and slicing and slicing while at work. We were having a dead day. I was restocking the cage in the warehouse for all the housekeeping supplies. And that's, you know, a lot of boxes. And I was cutting them down into itty little bitty pieces until I had enough to fill an entire Rubbermaid trash barrel with it. And by the end of it, this was by no means hair shaving sharp. It was, you know, tearing a little bit when cutting paper, but it was still slicing paper decently enough. I call that very impressive for a $20 to $25 knife. And how did that blade perform? Outstandingly. This thing lasers through cardboard. It just slices so beautifully. And guess what? I sharpened it back up after getting it home. I put a lot more use on it since, as you can tell. But it took a beautiful razor sharp edge with very, very, very little effort. And I've got some use on it now, but let's see. Still pretty good, even after the additional use I've put on it. Now this one back here is factory. And it's not as impressive. Could have come sharper. I will say the newer generation one came sharper than this older one did. Which, by the way, big shout out to We All Juggle Knives. He sent this to me like 3 years ago for the purpose of when I review this knife. And I'm just now getting around to it. So sorry it took so long, but thank you so much for sending this to me. I really appreciate it because it's going to create some interesting points of contrast when I talk about the design differences. Yeah, absolutely wonderful performing blade. Kind of a leaf-shaped drop point, if you will. Fairly thin, which is part of why it slices so well, and it's obviously full flat ground. Just a great performing blade. Absolutely love it. And I want to quickly talk about that 440C stamp because, funny enough, Ganzo talks about the steels they use on their website, and ordinarily when you buy a knife from China that is calling itself 440C, what it's really going to be is the Chinese equivalent, which is 9CR18MOV, which is slightly different. There's actually some ways 440C is better. There's some ways 9CR18 is better, but they're very comparable. However, Ganzo actually uses both 440C and 9CR18MOV and will stamp their blades accordingly depending on which one is on that particular knife. So, yeah, this is a true 440C blade. It's not a Chinese equivalent to it, which is really interesting. Most of the time, that's not going to be the case. So I just thought it was neat. I thought it was worth noting. Now, the blade shape is actually subtly different between these two, and I don't just mean in the opening hole. In the Generation 1, you can see it's just like a paramilitary. It just starts, it moves, it has a slight amount of belly, and it trails towards the tip. Okay? But if we bring in the newer generation, you can kind of see it actually has a very slight recurve, starting back here towards the sharpening choil. That blade moves back. I'm trying to illustrate this without it losing focus. Let's see here. The blade actually moves backwards and then comes out and recurves very subtly towards that belly. So when we put the two blades side by side, maybe you can see that very, very slight difference in the blade. It's not huge, but it's there. They did just enough to make the blade ever so slightly different than the paramilitary of which it's copying. Not enough to say this is a distinct design by any means, but I do think it's interesting that they, changed it up a little bit from the original formula. Now you can obviously tell that they've also changed the opening hole. The original had a spidey hole, a perfectly round spidey hole, and the newer generation version has this kind of slightly more ovangular egg-shaped hole, which, as far as function goes, go ahead and close these both up. This one obviously performs like any Spyderco would. This works just fine. It's maybe technically inferior, as since the hole itself is smaller, it may be more difficult for people with really fat thumbs to get their thumb in there to deploy it, or maybe if you're wearing gloves, it would be a little more difficult. So this is probably the technically better design, but I can respect Ganzo for trying to step away from being as blatant of a copy and make subtle changes here and there to give the knife a little bit more of its own identity. Honestly, I don't mind it either way. I can get both of these out nice and fast. And by the way, the lockup is solid. I have no play up and down. I have no play side to side. Same thing on this older generation. Well, actually, very slight up and down, actually. When I really rock on it, very, very, very slight up and down on this older generation. So that's interesting. The newer one actually locks up slightly better. And if we ever develop play in the pivot, we can easily adjust it there on the dual-sided pivot screws, which I personally like because it means we can also adjust our centering, which, as you can see, is spot on perfect on both of these. No work needed whatsoever. The axis lock is another way that these vary from each other a little bit. If we bring them in, you can see that they change the design very slightly just on the aesthetic portion of the axis lock. A couple more milled in circles versus this, and then this is also domed out a little bit more, whereas this is more flat. So very, very small changes. They both have the same equally useless jimping on the top of the spine. Bring that in and you can see that. And by the way, you may be able to tell that, you may not, but the newer one has a very slightly thicker stop pin. So potentially a little bit stronger. I don't know. I find that interesting. They're riding on phosphor bronze washers. There's no, well, phosphor bronze and Teflon, actually. There's no ball bearings in the pivot point here. And that does not bother me. Like I said, they come out fast enough. I will say the lock on this older one is more broken in, so it's easier to do the Benchmade axis flips. I have to put significantly more wrist action into this one to get this to deploy and close just using the axis lock. This older one is a little bit easier. Probably just because it's been played with more. This has been carried and used, but it hasn't been fully broken in. I have some other Ganzos with the same locking mechanism that are fully broken in by now, so I'm not too worried about it. Handles are 4.8 inches long, and they are both made of G10. It is a kind of medium texture. This gray one is actually slightly more aggressive than this green one. And again, this is new in new condition as well. The gray one has slightly more grip, not a whole lot. I'd still call them both medium traction. And one other difference between these two versions, the older and the newer, is on the older one, they did not skeletonize the stainless steel liners. While on the newer one, they have drilled those out pretty effectively. And it does create a difference in the weight. Let's go ahead and close these up. And I'll bring in my little scale, my little drug dealer scale, and we'll weigh these up. So I'll start with the older version. 4.45 ounces. And then the new version, 4.09 ounces. So we saved about 0.3 ounces by skeletonizing the stainless steel liners. Is that a huge difference? Not really, but I can say you do feel it in the hand. This does feel noticeably lighter than this, even though this was never a super heavy knife to begin with. The pocket clip is identical on both of them. It is the typical Ganzo clip, very similar to the spoon-built shape of a lot of Spyderco and Bird knives, just by way of comparison, but a different attachment method. All that said, though, it is strong. It's very stout, has good tension, doesn't flare up towards the tip. Here's the first generation version. A little bit weaker tension on this one, but still perfectly adequate. I like these clips. I've never had an issue with one bending. I've never had an issue with one catching on something. They leave just enough exposed from the pocket, and in fact, I'll bring in the old cutlery lover pocket. I was actually chatting with him on Facebook a little bit today, just talking about some of his old videos and trades we've done over the years. Cool dude. You can see how they carry in the pocket. I think that's perfect. It's just enough exposed that we can grab onto the knife and extract it without so much being exposed that I'm worried about losing the knife. And I have lost a few knives. I've definitely lost a few knives, which is always really, really sad. And as you can see, it is drilled out to be swapped over to the left-hand side. So this is a completely ambidextrous knife. 100% ambidextrous for the price. A fantastic blade steel, great lockup, good handle design, which, by the way, the handle is very ergonomic. This thing is very, very comfortable in the hand, whether you're talking the new or the old one. It just fits. And of course it does. It's a copy of a Spyderco Paramilitary. The Paramilitary is a great design. But for a $25 knife, they have radiused the edges of this G10 extremely well. This does not feel blocky. And I've reviewed so many knives that are much more expensive that feel very brick-like in the hand. I'm happy to say these are not among them. And we have a finger choil, we can choke up there. I do wish this jimping was functional. It kind of sucks. But I do like being able to choke up on the blade. You can also rest your thumb into that hole for more control if you're doing that kind of carving work. So ergonomics are fantastic. The weight is fantastic. The materials are fantastic. The build quality is fantastic. What is not to love about these knives? Well, simply put, if you are super anti-copy, then you're going to be anti these knives, because at its core, even with the changes they've made, it's still a copy of a Spyderco Paramilitary 2 with a little bit of Benchmade thrown in there for design language. That being said, for 20 to 25 bucks, it doesn't have that many knives out there, even in this amazing day and age of budget knives, that really compete on the same level at its price point. Now, I'm going to show you some competitive options anyways. Here's that M-Tech Evolution that I reviewed. I'm not going to say the full model number. 8CR 13MOV blade, micarta handle, looped over deep carry clip. Pretty comfortable in the hand, very thin. Price is, on average, 25 to 40 bucks, so at the same price or higher than the Ganzo. And I picked the Ganzo all day over the M-Tech. This is a decent knife. For an M-Tech, it's actually a great knife, but the Ganzo beats it quite readily, I'll be honest with you. How about a bit of a old school option in the Chinese knife world? This is the Enlin EL01, one of the original big three budget Chinese knives. 8CR 13MOV blade, G10 handles, clip that exposes quite a bit from the pocket, but super thick stainless steel liners, which earned this the title of the poor man's zero tolerance. You can find these online for about $16, and I think Boker has rebranded this under their Magnum line. I forget what they call it, but you can get that one for like 20 to 25. So it's in the same ballpark, comparing that against the Ganzo. How about this one? I reviewed this one as well. This is the Sanren Mulan Model 911, 12C27 steel, G10 handles. It's a Benza copy, liner lock. Made in China as well. Also fantastic ergonomics. This thing was also a 10 out of 10, if I remember correctly. I'm equally happy with both of these knives. It's a great competitive offering. This is the CH Knives 3002. D2 steel, G10 handle, liner lock, big knife. Price is about $40 on this one. Not a super fan of that clip, to be honest with you. It flares up quite a bit and the tension kind of sucks. But a great knife overall, but about twice the price of the Ganzo. For anyone out there who prefers to buy American-made, well, here's at least a partially American-made. This is the Buck Bantam BHW, made of U.S. and foreign parts and assembled in the USA. 420 HC steel, glass reinforced nylon handle. Okay, so somewhat American offering. Price range, I think, on these is about 30 to 35 these days, if memory serves. So, you know, again, we're looking at about 50% more than the Ganzo, but it's in that same budget realm. Here's one I reviewed. This is the OK Knives, OK229, I believe, M390 steel, carbon fiber handles, compression lock, straight up copying the Spyderco Shaman. Price is about $56 currently, so you can buy almost 3 of the Ganzos for one of these, but the blade steel on this is a massive upgrade, even over 440C. Great build quality. It's worth bringing in the conversation. What else do we got? Okay, here's one. This is the Shield-On Knives Sharkos 9CR 18MOV Damascus blade, carbon fiber G10 handles. Big honking knife. Price is about $60 though. Quite a bit more expensive than the Ganzo. Beautiful quality though. Really loving this one. And the final one I'm going to bring in is to illustrate a point. And this is the Bird Harrier 2 G10. 8CR 13MOV steel, G10 handles, 4-way swappable clip, classic Spyderco style design. Price is $55 to $60, also made in China. And this is one of the reasons why the Ganzo knives, I think, need to be kind of taken a little bit more seriously, because you're supporting a Chinese knife company by buying this, but you're getting a better steel. You're getting an overall better knife, in my opinion. I vastly prefer the Ganzo over the Bird. I like the Bird. I gave it a good review. But this is a much better knife, in my opinion. So you're getting, equal or better materials, equal or better build quality, more of a fidget factor, which is worth something to a lot of folks, a better overall design for a third of the price. And the argument of, well, at least when you buy the bird, you're supporting a U.S. company. I mean, yeah, that's true. You are putting some money back in the U.S. economy, but Spyderco is then turning around and putting their money, the money you gave them, into the Chinese economy to have it produced. So China's getting paid either way. And you have to decide if that little bit of money that stays within the U.S. economy because you bought the bird instead is worth it versus saving yourself a significant amount of money relative to the cost of the items and just buying the Chinese brand to begin with. It's interesting. It is damn interesting. That's all I'm trying to say. I'm not here to tell you what you should do one way or the next, but for me, I love my Ganzos, and I'm going to continue to use them, carry them, and honestly buy more of them because they are fantastic knives for the money, and I am a budget-focused channel whose only interest is getting you the best deal possible. So, I hope this review was helpful, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.